Alright guys, today we're going to take a look at the Vortex PST Gen II in 3 to 15 power. Let's take a look at what I like and a couple of the things that it's perhaps lacking. So I wanted to build a rifle that was light enough to hunt with, but had the accuracy and design that would lend itself to long-range shooting. And I ended up with the Christensen Arms MPR. I've got a couple of videos talking about some of my initial impressions on it. I will have a full review of it coming up now that I've had a little time to shoot it in matches and take it hunting a couple times. But with this setup, I wanted a scope that was going to give me the ability to shoot longer ranges, but that didn't weigh too much. So you look at something like a Vortex Razor HD Gen II, and they're great scopes, a lot of magnification range, a lot of features, but they also end up being very heavy. So I was kind of trying to find a balance. I decided I didn't have the budget for the Vortex AMG. I'd really like to try one of those out. I've gotten to see through a couple of them, try them out at one of the matches that I was at, and they're definitely great scopes, but a little more than I wanted to spend at the time. So I ended up with this Vortex PST Gen II, and I chose the 3 to 15 power basically as what I felt like was more appropriate for the style of hunting that I do. Now, I want to be able to push out the distance a little bit as far as hunting, but realistically, I'm not going to take a hunting shot nearly as far as I would in a competition or at the range. So it was a little more important for me to have the low end, that 3 power, versus something like a 5 to 25. Because a lot of where we end up hunting, you may be able to get out in the open occasionally to see a little further or to glass, but we're also hunting along the edges of pine and thicker aspen quite a lot. So you're not necessarily able to get out and just sit there with a 1,000-yard view and sit behind your rifle scope. I really wanted the ability to be able to dial it to a little bit higher magnification, but also dial it down to 3, so if I'm walking through the woods, trying to get from one spot to another in some dark timber, I still have a chance of getting a shot off. In fact, I just recently shot a doe mule deer. It was just a private property on my own land, and that shot was at maybe 20 yards. So the ability to zoom out and take an offhand shot at a closer distance is definitely a big advantage of this magnification range. Now, having said that, I compete. Typically, my main match gun has an older Leupold 4.5 to 14 power Mark IV on it, and there's been very few, if any, times where I've really felt like in the course of a competition that I needed more magnification. You're going to notice the mirage less with a lower power scope. Also, if you're transitioning from target to target for, say, steel targets at a PRS style match, you're not going to have to zoom out to find the next target and then zoom back in, which I see at a lot of matches. So that 15 power is actually a pretty good balance. At the Vortex Extreme match, we shot, I think the longest target, if I remember right, was about 1,280 yards. And it was really hard hitting that target because you couldn't spot misses because of the distance and because of the grass behind it. You couldn't see any splash. But I was able to see the target plenty well to engage it. It was just a different issue of getting the wind calls right and being able to spot your splash as to whether or not you could actually hit the target. So that 3 to 15 power is a really good general range, and you're going to save a little bit of weight compared to a 5 to 25 power scope. So starting in the back, let's kind of look at some of the features real quick. You've got a ocular adjustment. Make sure you get the focus set up for your eyes. I'd suggest doing that with a blank wall, just a white wall or something like that. Sometime I can talk about that a little more if there's any interest in that. Next up is your zoom ring. It's fairly tight. I would like it if it was just a little bit easier to adjust. Overall though, depending on what I'm doing, if I'm hunting I may adjust it a little bit. If I'm at a match, I'm probably dialed up to around 13 to 15x, and I'm pretty much leaving it there. Going up, you have a 30mm tube, so you'll need the 30mm scope rings. I'm using the Vortex Precision in a medium height to mount this on the modern precision rifle. Then you get to your adjustments. So this is the MRAD version, so 1 click equals 1/10 of a MRAD. And what I like about this is it has really positive click adjustments. See if you can listen to this. May not be very obvious on the video. Maybe I'll try to do a close-up, see if I can get the sound a little better. It's not a real loud or a real hard stop in between, but it's just enough that you really feel each step, each click, and you can hear it, but it's not obnoxious. I think it's a good balance of allowing it to be tactile in how you feel it, but still move rapidly or be able to adjust finely between clicks. You're not. I felt some scopes that are just mushy and it feels like you have no click, or I've actually had a couple that were the opposite. So 10 mils of adjustment up and down. That gives you, for me, for the 6.5 Creedmoor setup, it gives me beyond 1,000 yards all on one revolution, which is nice because then it's much less likely that you're going to be on the wrong revolution. It does give, to help protect you from being on the wrong revolution, there is a zero stop. So if you end up going up beyond, there is a very hard and definite zero stop. There's no mush to it. It stops hard. And it's a little tricky to set up. That's probably one disadvantage of the way the zero stop is set up. It's just a little bit tricky to set it up the first time if you're not used to it. I would definitely suggest following the instructions as you do it. In fact, you may have to do it a couple times if you ever adjust the zero stop. So my zero stop, the hard zero, is right at 0. I'm probably going to have to adjust that once I switch to the ASR mount on the MPR, and if I set it up again, I'm probably going to go to where 0 is about 5/10 below the actual 0. That way you have a little bit of an ability to dial below if necessary. On the Windage, Windage has the same positive clicks, 1/10 of a mil for adjustment. It's 10 mils revolution. It's marked for left and right up to 5. So there is no lock or anything for the Windage. At the Vortex Extreme match, I actually was putting it in and out of a backpack, and I had one of the stages where I was missing into the wind probably 1.5 mils, and unfortunately I realized after I engaged a couple targets and decided to look at the scope that had adjusted almost 2 full mils probably in my backpack. So I wouldn't mind a locking Windage. It kind of depends on how you shoot. I personally will generally dial for elevation and then use the reticle to hold for Windage. On the left side of the scope, as you're looking behind it, you have your parallax adjustment. Parallax adjustment is marked from 20 yards to 500, and then there's an avidity position. I've found that it's pretty close to right on what it's marked at. Now, you do need to set it up properly for the distance, and you can verify that by moving your head. Again, that's something that would kind of take a whole nother video to describe how to use parallax. Parallax gets me right in the ballpark, and then it just takes a very small tweak to get it set correctly. On the outside of the parallax knob, you'll find the Illumination. Now in Colorado, you're not supposed to have electronics in the scope when you're hunting, so I have the battery out, and I have not been using the Illumination. But I did play with it a little bit when I first got it. You have 10 settings for the Illumination and basically an offsetting in between each, which is nice. So you don't have to dial all the way, if you want to use, let's say, 7 as your brightness setting, you don't have to go all the way to 0 to turn it off and then go back to 7 when you want it on. You can just go from 7 to off, back to 7, or however you choose to use it. Going out in front, the objective lens on the PST 3-15 is a 44mm objective, so it's fairly narrow, which does allow you to get it mounted a little lower than you might on a scope with a 50 or 56mm objective. I've not had any issues with light transmission. In fact, it seems plenty bright to me. We'll talk a little bit more about that here in just a minute. And then there's a sunshade that screws on that comes with the scope if you choose to use that. Just to help keep some of the sun off. Obviously, it adds a little bit of length, I'd say about 4 inches, but it can be nice if you're shooting towards the sun. Let's talk a little bit about the sharpness of the glass and the brightness of the scope. Now, this is not a 2000, 3000 or more scope. This is typically, depending on if you watch sales or MSRP, you're probably going to find this scope somewhere around $800 to $900, maybe a little better if you find a good sale. But when you compare it to other similar price scopes, let's say the Leupold Mark IV that I've been using, which is an older scope, the one I'm using is probably at least 10 years old at this point. I also have a Bushnell DMR2 that if you watch some of my videos, you've seen that on the Ruger Precision rifle that I shoot. And when I compare this to those at a very similar price point, in my mind, the Vortex is sharper, it's brighter, and it seems to be more clear from edge to edge. Now, I have shot some more expensive scopes, or I've had the opportunity to kind of play with, get behind other competitors' rifles that have them. You know, I've looked at the Razor, I've looked at some of the Premier optics, Night Force, Schmidt & Bender, and, you know, sure, do some of them have better glass? Yes. At the price point, you're not going to get the same glass at $1,000 as you will at $2,000, $3,000 plus, but I do think that the quality of glass that you're getting in this is definitely worth the money. And let's talk about those price. If you're the kind of guy that's dropping $7,000, even $5,000 on your competition setup, then sure, go ahead and get that more expensive glass. And there's nothing wrong with that. In fact, at some point, I'm going to upgrade my main competition rifle from the Leupold Mark IV to a Vortex Razor HD Gen II, just because it's got some of the features and the magnification range that I want in some uses. It's worked okay for me, but there are some things that I would like a zero stop, like a reticle and turrets that match measurements, which the Leupold doesn't for some odd reason. And there's certain things that you may find with a higher price scope or a quality that's there, but you know, when you're in field conditions shooting a match, let's take the Whittington Center match that I've shot, the sporting rifle match in New Mexico. If it's July or August and it's 90 degrees outside and the sun is beating down and the mirage is horrible, you're probably not going to see a huge difference between a scope like this and a scope like a Night Force or Schmidt & Bender or something that's a little bit higher end, because the visual quality that you get through the mirage and the atmospheric conditions, it's going to degrade the image way more than the quality of the glass. So if you're newer to competition shooting or you want to get your first true long-range scope, I would definitely say that the Vortex PST Gen II is a great value. It is not the cheapest scope, but it gives you first focal plane, it gives you solid repeatable adjustments, it gives you a zero stop, clear enough glass that you're not going to have any issues with using it, and it's a scope that can grow with you. You know, there may be a point where you choose to upgrade to something nicer, but you won't really need to with a scope like the PST Gen II. It's going to be a lot more scope and a lot higher quality than something that's really inexpensive, that's only a couple $100, but it will give you the features that you need to grow. I would say that most people are not going to need to upgrade from the PST Gen II because the scope is not meeting their needs or is not capable of shooting the way that they are. I think most people that move away from it it's not because of the deficiency of the scope, it's because they've gone to a point where they want to have better equipment. And if you have the budget or the experience or, you know, a justification because you're a top level competitor, great. You know, use whatever you think you need to, but I wouldn't feel like this is not enough scope if you're just getting started. This is a scope that can definitely grow with you, and even if you decide to upgrade it, it would be great to put it back onto a 22 trainer or a 223 trainer and keep using it in that regard. In fact, if you use this for a handful of years and then switch to, let's say, an HD Razor Gen II, you'd get a similar feel in the turrets, and it would make a great backup or training scope to be put on a 223 or a 22 long rifle if you want to compete in some of the NRL 22 style matches. Another thing I like about the scope is it is a first focal plane, which to me is just a requirement for long range shooting, and especially in a competition setting. With the first focal plane, you get a reticle that gets larger or smaller depending on as you zoom in or zoom out. But what that means is your subtensions in the reticle, your mil marks, your half mil, your 0.2 mil marks are the same no matter what zoom range you're on. So your reticle subtensions will always be right on, whether you're shooting 3 power, 15 power. One disadvantage of using first focal plane is at 3 power, the reticle is very small, and for some people can be kind of hard to see. And then as you zoom in at 15 power, you're only going to see a portion of the reticle, and it's going to be quite a bit thicker. Now, I shot this at the Vortex Extreme match earlier this year at up to 1,280 yards. I shot it at the Whittington Center Sporting Rifle match. I think those go out to a little over 800 at the furthest. And at 15 power, it's definitely not too big for me. I really like the reticle, especially at those higher zoom ranges for the 3 to 15 model. Alright guys, so that was a little bit of an overview of some of the pluses and minuses of the Vortex PST Gen II and 3 to 15 power. Let me know in the comments below what you think of this scope. Have you used it? Have you used the 5 to 25 power? And if you upgraded, why did you upgrade? Did you find that the scope was actually limiting you, or did you just upgrade because you had the funds or opportunity to do so? So let me know that in the comments below. Let me know if you have any other questions about this. I'll try to get to as many of those questions as I can. And otherwise, thank you very much for watching. Please like this video, subscribe if you haven't. I'm trying to get more content out, but unfortunately, it's hard to tell what people actually want because I don't get a lot of feedback as far as likes and comments and stuff like that. So let me know what you're thinking, what you would like to see, and hopefully I can bring some more content actually geared towards what the viewers want. Thanks for watching. Stay tuned for the next video.